So I was about 3.5 years old and I was living in an apartment, and I woke up one night to being paralyzed in my bed. I was laying flat on my back and there were two creatures standing in my doorway. I didn't have any context for it. I watched Sesame Street as a kid. There wasn't even an internet. There were no alien shows that I'm even aware of. There was no reason for me to see these creatures standing in my room that I am aware of.
Welcome back, everyone. I am here with Fringe. Fringe, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate being here.
Okay. Now, you have a long history of being an abductee, contactee, experiencer, whatever you want to call it. I know each of those is a loaded term depending on the perspective of the person who's experienced these things. But just tell the audience just briefly what your background is. Like, what did you do in your professional life before you got on this? Because I think that actually helps. And then after that, if you could kind of walk the audience through when you first been having these experiences.
Sure. So I like to start out just by saying I am a regular person. I'm just a regular, average, everyday person. You could meet me on the street any day, at the grocery store, do people go to banks anymore? I don't know, but you get what I'm saying. I'm just a regular person. I could be your neighbor. I could be a relative of yours. I've lived a regular life. I did almost 20 years at a major metropolitan police department as a law enforcement officer. I had an amazing career. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'm married. I've been married for 26 years. My husband was also in law enforcement. We ended up working together for a short period before we were married. I'm a grandmother. I live in a small town where people still say hello to each other. And I just live a regular, average life. I'm just like, your sister, your mother, your neighbor. At that very same time, I'm also find myself dealing with what we call in ufology the alien abduction phenomenon. And this is the very strange but very real phenomenon where what we refer to as non-human intelligence are taking humans out of their human environment and transporting us into the alien environment. They are frequently engaging in medical procedures. They appear to be creating a hybrid race and many different things that sound absolutely insane to average, everyday people in the world. Things that sound like conspiracies, things you might read in a tabloid magazine. These things are happening to me. They're happening to members of my family, and they're happening to someone that people in your audience know. And when we look at the numbers, if you look at the abduction research that's been done, nobody is sure exactly how many people it's happening to, but it's in the millions. So the chances that someone this is happening to it's pretty high. So again, I'm just an average everyday person, but I have something extraordinary happening to me, which sounds very unbelievable to most people. And that puts people like me in a very difficult position because it's something that we don't like to talk about usually to most people. In fact, the only reason I'm even here today to talk about it is because I'm in the position right now to push back against this agenda, or what I believe the agenda is of these beings. And that's why I'm here today. Otherwise, I really have no reason to be here at all. I would have no reason to put myself out there. I've been attacked. I'm called all types of names and had a few campaigns against me because people don't like my message. But the reason I'm here and the reason I persist is because I think that there is something very nefarious about these so-called aliens. And that's why I'm here on your show today. And thank you very much for the invite. I appreciate it.
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Bain Books at bain.com.
Yeah, and for people who know me, I talk to everybody. I have not had much direct experience, if at all. So I'm pretty open to hearing all sides of the topic. I don't take one side because, again, I don't have any, as far as I know, any direct experience. And for me, I think that's something that certainly matters. I think it's also important to note that over the last several years, folks who aren't still skeptical of government in, not just this topic, but in mundane topics, right, has routinely lied and gaslit and done all sorts of things. So in the absence of information, I think it's important for everyone, people watching this podcast, to gather the data and make up your own mind. I think it's premature, unless you've directly experienced something, to come to, a firm conclusion. So just analyze the data, talk to people, and anecdotes are data, despite, you as a former law enforcement officer, know that you can convict somebody on witness accounts, right? So these things should not be dismissed. They're important, and you should all, you shouldn't believe everything, but you should kind of take the account on the weight of the evidence and decide for yourself. And I think that's what everybody owes experiencers, abductees, contactees, whatever they want to call themselves. So with that, when did this start to happen to you, or how far back can you remember that these experiences started happening?
So my first experience happened when I was a child, and I didn't have a lot of context for it. I really didn't know what I was looking at or what I was dealing with. I've gone back now and reconstructed my own history after realizing that there's something very strange going on. And by the way, I very much appreciate your attitude. All I ask is for people to please keep an open mind. I don't expect anyone to just believe me for no apparent reason, or the person standing next to me, or even another person. But when you start looking at all of the smoke around this topic, the conclusion is that there's a fire somewhere. And so I just ask people, please just keep an open mind. If you can listen to this with an open mind, that's really all I can ask. So I was a child. I have a bit of a strange family history. I was actually a foster child for a short time. And my foster brother ended up adopting me, and he was in the United States Navy. He was trained as an electrical engineer, and he worked on a nuclear submarine. It was the USS Dace in the 1970s. He was deployed for a time out of New London, Connecticut, out of the submarine base there. I was about 3.5 years old, and we were in an apartment just outside the base. And I know this just from speaking to my mother. I talked to my mom. I said, hey, this is the apartment we were in. This is where my bed was. This is where the window was. This is where my little sister was at the time. And what apartment was this? And so I'm going back now to figure out how old I was and where this actually happened.
Let me interject really quickly, because you said something that I want to point out to the audience that raises the interest level on this story. So you mentioned that your brother was a crewman on a nuclear submarine, I'm assuming, right?
Yes, but it's a little confusing because my foster brother ends up adopting me and he becomes my father. So I was a foster child. And then, yes, my foster brother ended up marrying my mother, my biological mother, and adopting me. I probably shouldn't have even thrown that in. I usually skip over that part because it's confusing. But yes,
that's okay.
He was on a nuclear submarine. He was involved in some very interesting projects that he still won't actually discuss.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
So, and what I want to flag for the audience is even other tales of abductions and things like that, there's often some sort of a tie, not always, but often a tie to like a nuclear facility, even the Pascagoula incident. There's a nuclear submarine plant in Pascagoula, right? So to have craft operating that area is not so odd. So anyway, I just wanted to flag that for the audience that you have a military, was the officer enlisted?
He was enlisted. He was,
Okay.
as near as I can tell, he was an electrical engineer. So his job was to keep the sub running, but his job was to make sure the nuclear power was running appropriately so that the ship, was running appropriately. Although he won't tell me exactly what he was doing.
Yeah, so he probably, when it came in, he would like participate in degaussing and all that stuff to reduce the magnetic signature and stuff like that of the like that all that sort of stuff. But okay, sorry, I didn't mean to intercede. I just wanted to flag.
Oh, not at all. Jump in anytime, and I forget half the stuff I'm even saying in the first place. So jump in anytime, and it's only now in hindsight. So I know a lot in hindsight that this is among abductees. It's very common to have a family in the military. Well, a lot of people have family in the military at the same time. So it's just a data point, but it is a data point. A lot of abductees have family in the military and family in intelligence agencies and places like JPLs and Lockheed Martin and stuff. But when you look at the population who have some family member in those areas, you're looking at a lot of people. So
yeah, especially at that time.
Yeah.
Now there's very few people serve in the military, but back then.
Fair point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's some commonality there, but at the same time, it's such a large commonality. It's kind of hard to dial that down, but that is a data point. He was also on the USS Seawolf. That submarine was also involved in some very interesting special operations.
This is like they only made 3 of these submarines, and I think this is the USS, like the Seawolf class submarines, right? Yeah, they only made 3 of them, and one of them I think crashed into an undersea mountain in the Pacific I think in 2015. Anyway, I know way too much about this.
Interesting, you do. You know more than I do. That's fantastic, though.
The USS Seawolf, I think, was the most advanced submarine that the U.S. Navy has, I think, fielded even to today. And they only made 3 because they were extremely expensive and budget cuts and whatnot. So anyway, sorry, continue.
So that's what he was doing when this incident happened to me. And again, this is a reconstruction from talking to my mom. I've spoken to my dad as well, but he's still pretty hush-hush about even what he did on the submarine. So I was about 3.5 years old, and I was living in an apartment, and I woke up one night to being paralyzed in my bed. I was laying flat on my back, and there were 2 creatures standing in my doorway. I didn't have any context for it. I watched Sesame Street as a kid. There wasn't even an internet. There were no alien shows that I'm even aware of. There was no reason for me to see these creatures standing in my room that I am aware of.
Do you recall what they looked like? Oh, you were just about to go there. I'm sorry.
But it's pretty limited. Don't be sorry. Interrupt me anytime. Any questions, just interrupt. I do it all the time. So they were very, very tall and very thin. And tall, I was a child, so I have to realize that tall might be relative at that point. But they were tall enough that they were very much filling up the doorway. So I've even gone back and tried to figure out, well, what was a doorway at an average apartment in the 1970s in New London, Connecticut? I'm guessing 6 feet. I'm guessing the doorway wasn't much taller than that. So as a child, they seemed very tall, but they were probably around 6 feet. They were not your average short little grays that I now know are called grays. So they were very tall, they were very thin, but they had a light coming off of them or reflecting on them. So I didn't see a lot of face or a lot of detail, just that they were very tall and very, very thin and frail looking. So they didn't have a lot of beef. They were both standing side by side in the doorway. So 2 of them were able to stand side by side in the doorway. So they weren't very large. They weren't very wide. I've said before, I don't remember even feeling fear. I don't remember being terrified or anything like that, just being frozen and not knowing what was going on or what these creatures were. I believe there was a light coming in from my window that was, while I was laying flat on my back, it would have been to my right. And that's it. My memory is pretty limited on that. I don't have any idea what happened before or after. I did get the impression, for whatever reason, that they were communicating amongst themselves. The impression I got was that they were checking on me. I don't have any idea why. I don't have any memories as to why that would be. And then that was it. So I spent most of my childhood actually being terrified of, creatures living under my bed, creatures living in the closet. I used to have to jump from my bed out as far as I could off the bed so that nothing could grab me from underneath. I did lay flat on my back with my arms tucked in very tightly to make sure nothing could grab me from under my bed. Now, these are experiences that many children could have. So again, I just kind of look back on my life and I try to put the pieces together, because I got to the age of 50 some odd before I had a big picture and realized what was going on. So it was kind of important for me to go back and think, wait, when did this start? What happened? So was I afraid because of that incident, because of other incidents that were happening that I just have no memory of? Maybe. I don't know. The abduction research shows that this starts in childhood, even as an infant, sometimes, oftentimes, and it continues throughout old age. I'm in touch with Ted Rice. You've probably heard of Ted. I want to say Ted's 86, maybe a little bit older than that, and he's still being taken by these creatures. So this is something that keeps going. People
And
think
this also borders on Carla Turner's, did I get her first name right? Research.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Jacobs, what's his first name?
David Jacobs.
David Jacobs, who I think is still around, but he's retired, so he doesn't conduct interviews anymore. But he did a lot of regressions on folks and, dealt with some of these stories. I think Carla Turner, didn't she die of an aggressive form of cancer or something like that?
She did. And if you want to hear a backstory on that while we're going along.
Sure. I have my suspicions and I don't know anything about it. Right.
Yeah. So it's my understanding, and I only know this, second, third hand, because I'm just hearing from someone who is a close friend of hers, that there was an abductee who saw Carla Turner on a ship at the same time and watched the aliens implant her with cancer. I don't know if that's true, but that's what's out there. It's actually something that only her close friends are aware of. So it's a possibility. The aliens have told me I have cancer too. So we could get to that story if you want to. I'll write it down so I could try to remember. So that was the strangest thing that happened to me in my childhood. And that was when I looked back and I thought, man, there was those weird creatures in my bedroom. What was that? And I've actually since now gone back and I've actually found a picture of something that looks very similar to what I saw in my bedroom. I have it, saved on my phone just for random purposes.
What was it?
The two creatures I saw, I can send it to you.
Send it to me, and then I can use it during the
that'd be awesome. Yeah. So I've kind of gone back. As a matter of fact, I was just scrolling one day and I went, "Oh my gosh, this is it. This is very close to what I saw." At least what my memory is. I was 3.5 years old, so everybody will understand that I was a child. And then I had a really weird incident. I sometimes don't even like to say it because people think it's ridiculous, but I am speaking on things that are ridiculous. So when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I have this all written out in a timeline. I've gone back and reconstructed my entire childhood. I had what was very likely a near-death experience. And then after that near-death experience, I ended up with this entity. It was a little tiny, tiny green entity, and it lived in my left hand in a little kangaroo pouch. Yes, I know. This is probably the strangest part of my entire story. And I later came across something that looked very similar to it, and it's Baby Groot. He looked very similar to Baby Groot. And he would come out. This would be during the day, wide awake, perfectly lucid. A lot of times when I was walking home from school, from the school bus, sometimes I spent a lot of time out in the woods by myself, sometimes with my little sister. And so this entity would come out and run around on my hand. And there was what I would now call telepathic communication, because there weren't any words spoken. And I know, as ridiculous as that sounds to adults, the abduction research actually shows that it's very common for especially grays to appear to children as something that's much more appealing than a gray alien. And so it's common for them to appear as a cartoon characters or as the Easter Bunny or something that's just kind of fun. And that's the way that they get you to follow them and to somewhat cooperate with what their agenda is. So I had that incident, which was obviously strange. It's something to this very moment, even as a stone cold sober adult, that I will tell you it was 100% real. This was not an imaginary friend. This was not something I couldn't see. It wasn't, invisible, again, living in the closet or something. This was something.
Was it a screen memory?
Very
could it
real
have been
to
a
me.
screen? Could it have been a screen memory?
I don't know. And so I have talked to several researchers now in the last couple of years about me and just, the entirety of my life. And all I know is that it is pretty common for the grays to look like other entities. There was one researcher who said that it was actually important that this thing lived in my left hand, and it had something to do with energy, and the way it would interact told her that this might be some type of an energy exchange, that it might have actually been feeding off of energy. I don't know at all. I have no idea at all. But she thought that that was interesting. So I had that happen when I was about 15. I played with the Ouija board, which I absolutely do not recommend for anyone.
Yeah, me
Now,
too.
I think
The
a lot
last
of
time I
people
did
say
that was when I was 12, and that was the last time I'll
cannot
ever
recommend.
touch
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
I know it seems like just a silly little game, but
Hard pass. Hard
pass. Yeah, hard pass
Yeah.
for me too. And there's so many stories out there. If you're going to take anything from my story today, don't play with a Ouija board. Don't let your kids get a Ouija board. I cannot recommend. So when I was about 15, a friend of mine and I played with the Ouija board. And we had some very interesting things happen to us while we were doing the Ouija board. At this time, my friends had no parents living in the home. So we're 15 and we're on our own, and we're literally just, doing what 15-year-olds want to do. And so playing with the Ouija board, we ended up having some very interesting things happen. There was a period when both of us could move objects. I could bend silverware. We could wish for something and it would appear. And I don't mean, a yacht, but oh my gosh, we need money, to go to 7-Eleven, boom, money right there on the ground or wherever. It was a magical time because it was very interesting, but at the same time, it got really scary for both of us because this thing started spelling out some weird stuff that I honestly can't even remember, but it scared the crap out of both of us. And my friend, who could be lying to me, we were 15, but we both got so scared of the Ouija board that she actually took it to her uncle's house and left it there. And this is what she told me. And the Ouija board was gone. Within a couple of weeks, the Ouija board was back at her house. Now, could her uncle have played a trick on her? Could she have completely made it up? Maybe. I'm not discounting those possibilities, but it was enough that both of us said, that's it, never again. There's some evil spirit living in that Ouija board, and we're not going to ever touch it again, which is actually a good thing, for us to have that reaction because it was very frightening for a teenager. Now, during that time, we also had a shared dream. And we both woke up one day and started talking about a dream we had. I don't think we spent the night together even that night. And by the next day, we were both convinced that there was going to be cataclysmic earth changes, including a pole shift. And I can't speak for her on this because I don't remember if she had this part. And I became convinced that the second coming of Christ was going to happen in my lifetime. Now, these things, again, they sound trivial until looking at the abduction research, most, if not all, abductees get these cataclysmic visions, and they're shown a time on the earth when the earth is going to undergo some extreme changes that are not good for humans at all. So I got to, I was 17 years old then when I saw what I now know is called Hat Man for the first time.
Mhm.
I had a
Shadow
terrifying, what's that?
Shadow people.
Shadow people, right? And again, at this point, there's no internet. I have not read a single book on shadow people. I don't know what shadow people are. I had no context for it whatsoever. I had a terrifying experience with Hat Man. Probably to this minute, it would be close with maybe one or two other things that have happened to me recently, but it was absolutely terrifying. And it wasn't until many, many years later, when I was in my 50s, that I even realized this thing is being seen all over the world. It has a name. I came across Heidi Hollis, who has a lot of research on shadow people and Hat Man. So that happened to me at 17. And throughout, I think there was a short period where I didn't see any Hat Man or shadow people again. But then certainly by the time I was in my 20s, I started experiencing what we now know are called shadow people, shadow beings. And that has gone on for the entirety of my adult life. So this also happened to my sister. And actually, I'm just going to say my siblings, two of my siblings, this was also happening too. So once we started comparing notes, I realized it's happening to two of my siblings as well. I went through several things. My first instinct, I feel sometimes like I was born a Christian. So I was a Christian from childhood. And my first instinct was to call in the name of Christ, get thee behind me, Satan. I mean, all of the things you can think of that a Christian would say to.
Yeah, Heidi Hollis said that actually works if you use the name Jesus, I think. And look, I'm not saying it from a religious perspective. I'm just saying this seems to be in the lore about something you can say that's effective.
It's definitely in the lore. Now, I have to be very, very honest and say it never worked for me. Mm-hmm. And there could be some reasons for that we could get into later, but it never worked for me. And it not working was more terrifying. Mm-hmm. So this was going on for quite some time. And then at some point, I think I've said late 20s, it might have been my early 30s, that I read in a magazine somewhere, and then ended up, by that time I had a computer and I looked it up online, and I found out that the science calls this phenomenon sleep paralysis. Mm-hmm. And when I read that article and I started looking it up online, I was so relieved that this was something called sleep paralysis, and the science, which I believed in wholeheartedly at the time, I no longer do. But the science told me.
Now you have to say the science in quotes nowadays,
unfortunately. Oh, and I would have done quotes. I can do them right here. Yeah. So the science told me this was a totally normal thing. And don't worry, this is a hallucination. And by the way, if this is a hallucination, I mean, it's the realest hallucination. Well, it's the second realest hallucination I've ever had in my life. But don't worry, just lay there passively. And, don't become fearful. Just take a deep breath and this will pass. And so at that time, I even contacted both of my siblings. This was also happening too. And I said, great news. This is nothing. This is not demonic. It's not evil like it feels. It's not how it looks. It's just a hallucination. This is called sleep paralysis, and there's nothing to worry about. And so I spent the next 2 decades believing that. And I would just lay there and I would tell myself, there's nothing to worry about. I would just take a deep breath and I would just try to wait for it to pass. And it wasn't until, again, I was in my 50s that I was sitting around somehow watching Gaia TV, and I came across a documentary-ish on shadow people. And the second it came on and they started talking, even my husband turned and looked at me and he said, but that's exactly how you described what happened to you. And I just got this, horrible, just gut feeling of just, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this is happening to other people. And is there something true about sleep paralysis? Likely, yes. I do believe that there is something called sleep paralysis that can happen to us as a normal part of exiting or entering sleep. But now, especially after the many experiences I've had in just the last couple of years, I no longer believe the science. And these shadow people are absolutely real. Hat Man is absolutely real. I have now gotten to the part where, under some strange circumstances, I end up being very lucid and very conscious during some of these experiences. And it took me to that point to say, oh, wow. So not only are shadow people real, but I got to the part where shadow people were transferring me or transporting me to the so-called alien ships and the alien environment. And that's when I put two and two together and I thought, oh, wow. Okay. So this shadow people thing has been happening to me my whole life. And it wasn't until I'm 55 right now. So I was about 54, maybe 53, when I had a fully conscious episode where from the minute the shadow person showed up, and then I realized that I'm in the alien environment, I was lucid. And so that's what it took for me to realize, oh, wow, this has probably been happening to me my whole entire life. And I just didn't know it. Now, could I ever say, I can never raise my hand and testify in court that that's what was happening to me, because I have no recollection of it whatsoever. But I can now do that. I can now say, this is what they're doing. This is what's happening, because I've maintained consciousness. And so was it happening to me my whole life? I believe so, yes. And again, looking at the abduction research. So I've said this before, but I want to say it again. If you start talking to average everyday people and you ask them, how many of you have seen a UFO? You're just going to get a couple of hands. How many of you seen an alien? You're not going to get very many hands at all. But if you ask, how many of you have seen a shadow being or Hat Man, a lot of hands are going to go up. How many of you have seen an entity in your bedroom and been paralyzed? A lot of hands are going to go up. So this is something that happens to a lot of people. Now, am I saying every single case of a shadow being is related to the alien abduction phenomenon? No. A shadow being could be, someone else in an astral form. Someone could mistake a ghost or an entity, a human even, who's passed as a shadow being, possibly. But what I can say definitively is at least some shadow beings are involved in the alien abduction phenomenon. And so that's kind of a recap of my life and how I got to my age before I put the whole big picture together, because I dealt with a lot of things that I would have called paranormal or supernatural. And to me, I was a Christian. That was just something that was just normal, not abnormal. I didn't feel like I was ever crazy or, walking the edge of lucidity or anything like that. It was just something that was normal. And so when I got to my age now, and I've now looked at the big picture, I realized it's not normal at all. And that what we think of as paranormal and supernatural is, a lot of it is just going to be technology that we don't understand and physics that we don't understand. And so we have the fields of science and the materialists who don't believe in anything paranormal or supernatural. And then we have the religious side of things where they believe, the religious people believe in anything that pretty much that's paranormal or supernatural. And I think what's going to end up happening is the religious people are going to be dumbfounded to learn that this is just physics that we don't understand, that it's really not supernatural. It's just something we don't understand. And then the scientists are someday going to realize that they locked us into this little box when they gave us the laws of physics, and they refused to consider anything else. And I think they're going to have to come out of that box. And
even the physics has been there since the 1930s, and that's quantum mechanics.
But they're not, right? Well, as far as I know, they're not telling anyone. They're not making it public knowledge. At least I was unaware of it, which doesn't mean the entirety of the universe is unaware, but
Now, to be fair, you have to be creative to kind of extrapolate
right.
what the double slit experiment, not the double slit experiment, but the fringe, right? The fringe experiment, right? When you go, when people think of the electron or the photon, whatever, hitting the wall, right? Or the screen, I think they use, then they only detect one photon. But when they don't think about where it's going, they get a fringe pattern, right? Which is the difference between a particle and a wave. But the point in that experiment is just having the intention of thinking about that electron collapse to the waveform, right? So a waveform is just a random probability of where that electron is most likely to, or photon is most likely to hit. But when you collapse the waveform, it becomes more deterministic. It just becomes that single particle. So if you extrapolate that into reality in terms of manifesting and shaping reality around you, right? It's still a little foo-foo, right? But if you can imagine advanced civilizations that are able to manipulate those forces, right? And you also consider that we're 99.999% empty space, because all we are is vibrating quarks that are built into electrons that are vibrating at another frequency. So we're just a bunch of, subatomic particles that are just vibrating at different frequencies. That gives us coherence. But even those are cohering and decohering out of existence every fraction of a second. So it looks like a solid universe to everybody, but it's not so solid. So the science is there. It's just the imagination is not there. And that's I think where the disconnect is.
That's a really good point.
I didn't mean to take you off course, but the physics is there. There's probably other physics that we don't, but even Einstein's equations can explain warp bubbles and all sorts of different things that you could exploit to have this faster than light travel by contracting space-time, etc. Anyway, nobody wants to hear me talk. So
probably don't want to hear me talking either, but yet here I am.
No, but I think it's important because even people who ascribe beneficial or beneficent attributes to these beings, they're still literally you're a former law enforcement officer. If another human did what they've done to you, just literally just taking you, stunning you, taking you out of your home somewhere else, that is literal kidnapping. So if you're beneficent, why do you need to do that? Why can't you get consent? Why can't you? And there may be reasons, right? But you really have to engage in a tortured set of logic to get there. It might be an experiment. They don't want to ruin the experiment. There could be any number of reasons that maybe possibly explain some of it. But
yeah, I think we have to bend over backwards to actually make excuses for them rather than taking them at face value.
Right. And again, I haven't made my mind up on this. I see compelling arguments on both sides, but I think it's important to note that's the one fact that I can't get over, right? You might say, well, you're engaging in anthropomorphic thinking. You're thinking like a person. Maybe they don't understand. I doubt it. If you're that advanced, we could figure out what works for ants and what doesn't work for ants, right? So when you had that fully conscious experience, can you walk the audience through that? How they came into your room, what happened, how did you get transferred to a craft, what happened on the craft, that sort of thing.
So what actually ended up happening to me is, even as a child and all the way through adulthood, I have been a lucid dreamer, and I've had many, many, many out-of-body experiences. So even as a child, I was having out-of-body experiences. As a child, I felt like I had been dropped from maybe 4 feet off my bed onto the bed. I would wake up in various places, although never locked outside. Other abductees have stories of being actually locked outside their own homes, which is pretty difficult thing to do. My mom would tell me I must have been sleepwalking. I could have been sleepwalking, maybe. But again, it's more about putting a really big picture together with a lot of different puzzle pieces coming together. And so when it was about 2021, in the summer of 2021, I had some life circumstances that just changed. And I ended up kind of realizing, you know what? I haven't been, going out of body too much. My lucid dreaming has not really been available to me. And so I started just exploring those avenues. I was a Christian, and so I didn't look at a lot of new age type practices. A lot of the meditation stuff, remote viewing stuff like that was a no-no for me. But at this time in my life, I just thought, I started exploring these avenues. And I actually started with a remote viewing class. And I learned during this class that this is not really woo or, anything satanic, so to speak. It's
Who did you take the class with, by the way?
It was Lori Williams.
Okay. Yeah.
So
I've met
she's
Lori. I've interviewed her. Yeah.
Lynn Buchanan's protege. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Lori had a history of being a Christian as well. And I actually put a lot of faith in her. She said, this is not, this is something anyone can do. It's just accessing your subconscious mind. And I went down that path. Now, I don't know if it was Lori or someone else, but while I was doing this type of exploration, I was actually told that what we're looking to do is to open up communication between our right brain and our left brain, our logic brain and our subconscious mind. And if we can do that, we can tap into all kinds of interesting areas. And so I was told, start writing down your dreams. And this can open up communication. I thought, okay, well, that's easy to do. And so as someone who remembers most of my dreams, I'm the type of person who almost always knows when I'm dreaming. I started writing down my dreams. And it was week number 2, and when I started writing down my dreams, that I started thinking, okay, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. And it got to where I didn't even want anyone to find my dream journal because I was afraid that they would think I was absolutely crazy. And so what happened when I started writing down my dreams was I could now look and realize, oh, wait, what is this? And the process of writing down my dreams started me on, it was a pretty long road, but it was a road of becoming more and more conscious at the time I thought they were dreams. And it got to the point where I can tell you right now today, I have been 100% conscious in a few different incidents and less than 100% in many, many others. 100% meaning as conscious as I am right now talking to you with zero doubt that I was dreaming or asleep. And so it was a long process. It didn't happen overnight, but I immediately started seeing that I was flying around in spaceships. And by the way, spaceships was nothing I ever thought about or considered. I hadn't seen any of the research. This was after COVID. And I will say that sometime during COVID, me and my husband watched The Phenomenon by James Fox. And I found it interesting, but I never thought about it again. So I'm not thinking about aliens. I'm not thinking about spaceships. I'm not thinking about meeting hybrid children. A bunch of medical procedures are happening. And I'm starting to think, what in the world is going on? And again, I'm slowly becoming more conscious. And so when I realized what was going on, I actually spent then a long period of time being very reluctant to believe it, because what was going on didn't make any sense in the logical world. So I am 55 years old. Without TMI, I am past the age of being able to have children. And what they were doing was all very much related around gynecological exams and children and creating children. And so I spent a long time thinking, okay, this is impossible. This has to be something else. This can't be right. It's not even possible for them to be doing what they're doing. And so I spent a long time doing that as well. So I didn't come to this willingly. I came to this very reluctantly. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And then when I finally accepted that this was happening, during that time, I had gotten into some new age practices of doing some energy work and, that kind of stuff. And by about October of 2023, I'm now becoming very conscious enough for sure. And it's sometimes 100% conscious during these incidents. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I don't want to derail this. I don't want to try to keep it truncated, but I've noticed that a lot of people, ever since, call it late 2021, 2022, started to engage in this topic for a variety of different reasons. But even this channel I started in 2022, at the very beginning, if you know Richard Geldrich, he started kind of doing the stuff that he was doing in kind of February, March of the same year. And it wasn't a direct path for me. I actually came into it through learning more about remote viewing and all that stuff. And it just kind of led me to this topic. So it seems like there's been some sort of collective, I don't want to call it awakening because it sounds too new agey. That's not kind of what I'm trying to say, but it seems like a lot of people were activated, I guess would be the terminology you could use, and read into that whatever it means. But people have become more engaged with consciousness, with this particular topic. And I don't know what it is at all to be. Same thing with like dreams and things like that. Ever since I've gotten to this topic, I don't want to say similar experiences, but the ability to lucid dream, the ability to know you're in a dream, the ability to, like interlopers in the dream, right? Like I've learned to play with them like a cat plays with a mouse, like just weird stuff like that you can't really point your finger on them.
It's difficult to explain to people. What you just said is very difficult to explain to someone who hasn't done it. Mm-hmm. And so I can hear that you have. And so it's easy for you to understand what I'm probably going to say. So what I think happened, and this is just the physical 3D part of it, I think COVID just ended up with a lot of people not going to work and not having a whole lot to do. And we just all started going down rabbit holes, right? So I think the era of COVID, of everyone staying home, and some people were just completely locked in their houses and couldn't go out. Some people were afraid to go out. Kids weren't going to school. People weren't going to work. I think COVID was a double-edged sword because I think it did end in people, at least more people becoming aware of at least the 3D clown show that we appear to be living in. And some people went further than that and became aware of the clown show that's actually happening behind the scenes. And that's where I ended up. And by October of 2023, I start realizing that there's a whole lot going on behind the scenes that most people are probably just not aware of. And so I have said before, I do think it was this remote viewing class I took, but I think very significantly, it was me starting to write down my dreams. And I'll find now people who just start engaging in anything creative at all can just open up that channel and we can start becoming more and more aware of the world around us. And it's just accessing the subconscious mind. There's really nothing magical or spiritual about it. It's all that information that is normally in there that we put it away, it is now accessible. And I think that's what I was looking at this time. And so I think that's what happened to me. Now we can go even to, so I was reading something by Carla Turner just the other day, and she was speculating back in the 1990s that abductees' brains were actually developing a resistance to the alien technology. And so that could have also been happening. So the more I became aware of what was happening to me, the more they were accessing me. Now, I don't know, was this happening at this frequency my entire life? Or was it, a few times a month? Like a lot of females are taken a few times a month for their entire lives, especially after they become fertile. So it seemed like the more I became aware, the frequency was higher. And so there are some changes that even Gary Nolan is noticing in experiencer brains, that there's an adaptation there. And
Caudate putamen.
putamen.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know how they pronounce it. The caudate putamen is how I read it.
He corrected me, so now I will never forget.
Oh, so how does he pronounce it? Because I've heard it a few different ways.
Caudate putamen.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. And so his research is showing changes in experiencer brains, which you're probably even more aware of than I am. And back in the 90s, Carla Turner speculated that our brains were actually adapting to the stimulus of their technology, of how they paralyze us and take us out of our environment. As a defense mechanism, she speculated that more and more abductees were becoming more and more aware of what was happening to them. And you had a ton of people coming out and saying, hey, this is what's happening. Whereas before, they had a much easier time wiping memories, and people would just go about their day without having any idea what was going on. So what came first, the chicken or the egg? I don't know. Something happened in my brain that made me more aware. Could it have been the remote viewing? Is it because they accessed me so many times that this defense mechanism was now developed? Even my body knows if they're going to show up. And that's just like a fight or flight thing. Our bodies become antenna. There's some speculation that childhood trauma actually, and I'm going to say this in non-scientific terms, it just grows a sixth sense where we start to anticipate our environment, and we're trying to anticipate the future, and the future can actually, be shown to us in our own minds just from anticipation and having to be super hyper aware of the environment and what's coming next in our environment. That can develop what we call psi abilities. So there's a whole lot going on, but whatever happened to me ended up in me becoming very much aware during many, not all, but many of my contacts. And so my story is very much a story in general speaking. I actually don't tell a whole lot of detail incidents, although I'm willing to. I had a really, really, really tough year last year. I spent the entirety of last year sleeping in a helmet made of Velostat. So what happened to me between about January and March or April of last year is I started realizing that the shadow people were involved, that they were using technology, that this was not supernatural or magic, that it was straight technology. I could feel them accessing certain parts of my brain with electricity, is how I say it. I don't know what it is, but it feels like electricity. And I had two extremely traumatic incidents that I actually won't go into detail about. It's just not even appropriate for social media or YouTube or anything like that. And I start on my own campaign to actually stop contact with these entities. I end up sleeping in this helmet made of Velostat for 7 months, every single night for 7 months. I was using scalar waves. I was using iron. I had purchased every type of crystal you can imagine. And I was kind of hitting it from the technology angle when I realized that they were using technology.
Aren't scalar waves like highly classified?
I don't think so. I mean, there might be a classified version, but there's a version that they sell on the internet for targeted individuals. Are they even real? I mean, the machine that I bought, is it actually truly producing what they're claiming? I don't know, but I was
But scalar waves do exist. It's just, I read a paper about it on the CIA's website, but it's just the way the electromagnetic radiation works. It cancels out so that the effect nets out to zero, but it's all the movement on the inside that causes all that. Generally it could be very effectively used as a weapon. But anyway, I didn't mean to.
Oh no, you're good. So I spent a lot of money last year trying to stop so-called alien abduction using technology. This was a couple of different devices. I tried, but one of them, so they're claiming to produce certain frequencies. Mm-hmm. And so even the solfeggio frequencies, they're claiming to produce these frequencies, but there's nothing audible. It's just the frequency coming out of the unit. So I was trying that, and I was terrified to go to sleep at night because of these two incidents that happened that it's not worth going into the detail. But they were so terrifying that I was living in basically a Nightmare on Elm Street type scenario where I was afraid to go to sleep. I would look around the room and get jealous. I was actually at a holiday with some of my family, and I was looking around the room thinking, if they only knew what I have to deal with from the second I closed my eyes at night, because they sometimes wouldn't even wait. My head wouldn't even hit the pillow before they were trying to come for me. So that's what I spent the majority of doing last year. I can tell you that in general, and this, maybe we'll get into this the second hour, but
Yeah,
in general.
In fact, one last thought from you. You're finish what you're going to say, and then we'll
Okay.
end the episode and we'll move on to the next one.
So in general, what's happening in general is these creatures are doing a lot of medical procedures, and they appear to be creating a hybrid race, a hybrid, between the gray alien and humans. This is what they appear to be doing. And again, I spent a long time thinking they cannot possibly be using me for this, because it's not even possible for them to do. And then I end up coming across the abduction research and realizing it actually is possible. It's actually happening to a lot of people. I'm in touch with 2 women right now. One of them is in her 60s, and one of them in her 70s, and they are still doing this. And now that I have seen the abduction research, because up until March or April, May, might have been May or so, that I found the UFO Twitter community, which is where we came across each other. I had not seen any of the research. So I did not know and did not understand that this is happening to women all across the globe. And it's happening to women my age and older all across the globe. And so it took me a very long time to accept that this was even happening to me. And once I saw the abduction research, I just thought, oh, wow. I mean, if I had known this, it would have saved me actually a lot of heartache. But, I think it happened exactly the way it needed to happen. It was something that I had to understand and realize for myself. I wouldn't want to have looked back and thought the only reason I thought this was happening to me is because I read it in a book somewhere. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. So basically what they're doing is a lot of medical procedures, but there's a lot of other things happening on the ships that people don't talk about that we can get into in the second hour.
Yeah, well, thank you, Fringe. It was an absolute pleasure. And I hope folks join us for the next episode, where we will begin to talk about some of the motivations of whatever these non-human intelligences are, and kind of get a line of sight on their agenda. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate it.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and you can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's two options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site. And there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much and keep watching. I really appreciate it.